Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you may be in the world, and whatever your calendar's crazy, chaotic noise that you might have going on. And we're happy to have you here. This is Criticality Live, presented by Secure Nation, the show where we cut through the noise, challenge assumptions, and talk honestly about the state of cybersecurity today. All right, enough from me. Let's get to the real reason why you're here. Our guest is someone who's been shaping conversations in cybersecurity and pushing the industry forward in ways that truly matters. So let's get into it. Phillip Wylie is a cybersecurity professional with over 28 years of industry experience in IT and cybersecurity. From wrestling bears, yes, actually bears, and future WWE Hall of Famers to tackling red team operations, he has literally done it all. He's taught at colleges. He's the founder of the Pwn School Project, DEFCON Group 904. He brings a diverse background in multiple cybersecurity disciplines, including networking, application security, and pen testing. But Phillip isn't just a pen tester. He's a titan in our field. He's the concept creator and co-author of the Pentester BluePrint, starting a career as an ethical hacker, one of the most highly regarded books, and that was inspired by lectures he presented while teaching classes at Dallas College, which later became conferences talks. Phillip is also the host of the Phillip Wylie Show and the Hacker Factory podcast. Additionally, he's frequently a world-renowned conference speaker. And by world-renowned, I mean all over the world. Workshop instructor and mentor. So with that, welcome, Phil.
Thanks for the warm welcome. Great to be joining you guys.
Hi. Thank you. It's so great to have you here. I had not seen the bear wrestling until Josh pointed out to me. I mean, that's very cool, terrifying. But as someone who thinks about risk, that was very terrifying to me, but very cool. Anyway, let's get into it. There's always a journey into leadership. You know, I have my own, so does Josh. And, that early spark, a detour, or a moment where something clicks in your career trajectory and your life essentially changes. So when you think back to your very first security moment, what was it? Like, was there like a first time where you realized, wait a second, this stuff matters, and I want to be the person who understands it?
Yeah, so that was back in my IT career. I started out as a system administrator and I just kind of got interested in security. I kind of started out by securing our Windows servers, and it's kind of funny experience because sometimes I would secure things a little bit too well and people couldn't get into it, but that was kind of my first attempt into cybersecurity, and then I got my first role in 2004.
Wow, that's incredible. I feel like that's a very different path than I myself have taken. But Josh, that sounds like something that you are familiar with.
Oh, I have absolutely been thumped early in my career for overly securing things to where I have broke them. Phil, you're most known as a pen tester. So early in your career, what did you think offensive security and cybersecurity would be? And what did it actually turn out to be once you were doing it for real? And was there a difference, or was it exactly what you thought and was super Gucci?
It was when I got into it, I didn't really know what to expect of it because whenever I first learned of pen testing was during my first role in cybersecurity. So my first role, I was just a security analyst. We did firewall administration, intrusion detection systems, some vulnerability scanning and risk assessments. That was pretty much it. And then the company hired a new CISO, and within my second year of security. By the time I've been in security about a year and a half, and he came in with a more modern idea of the way security teams should be run, because there was 5 or 6 of us doing the same thing, and then you had the IAM team that was setting up user accounts. And fortunately, I got put on the AppSec team, and along with being on the AppSec team, I managed our third-party pen tests, and I got to get experience uh, you know the reports and stuff by that team, and it seemed like really something interesting to me. So when I got laid off from my job in 2012, I applied for a pen testing role. So once I got into pen testing, yeah, there was a little bit of difference. A lot of people don't think as much about the report writing, and there's a lot of boring things that go along with pen testing. Like when you do your initial vulnerability scans, you find certificate issues like with TLS or SSL. You have to go through and validate all those. So validating some of the boring findings were kind of some of the things that I didn't like, but it's just the nature of the game and worth it to get to do the fun stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
for me, when I first started tipping my toe into pen testing, I thought it was going to be all cool stuff, breaking in and doing, Ocean's 11 type stuff, and then I realized that a lot of it was writing reports and documenting how you did the things, and that was something that I was not into. So I went back to doing blue team stuff.
That and some of the challenges too is whenever you excuse me, whenever you would submit a report and do the debrief or readout with the customer, or if you're an internal resource, some of the pushback you would get. So that was one of the things, and I just don't like confrontation, but you just kind of almost you're like a lawyer defending your case. So one of the things I advise anyone that's new to this or want to get into it is just make sure you really well document anything that you're able to exploit. Have a lot of good documentation. There was one case where I was doing a PCI based pen test, and one of the project managers kept trying to push back getting servers pulled out of scope. And they came up on one of the servers. They said, yeah, this server just connects to the PCI environment. It doesn't store or transmit data. So I went through and made a screenshot of the PCI document, the PDF, where it says anything that connects, transmits, or stores PCI data. I had the proof there, and then also sent the document to, and the QSA was on the call and said, yeah, he's correct. So it's one of the things, one of my big pet peeves in security is where people try and negotiate things out of it. They're trying to get you, some cases, to downgrade the vulnerability so they look better. And, we really need to be working towards things being secure, not trying to remove things out of reports that you don't want or downgrade the criticality to make it look better.
Yeah, and that my role coming into being a CISO was GRC centric. So I'm very much accustomed to what you two are talking about, from the here's your requirements and then people trying to wiggle their way out of them, or to negotiate down, say, like risk ratings and things like that. So I can absolutely relate to that side of your journey there. So do you think then, like when you talk about organizations and how they break, not in theory though, but like how organizations break, is it because of the people, the process, or the technology? When you see all these findings coming in, and then you have people on the other side that are now trying to negotiate, beg, barter, steal, whatever it might be, pull things out of scope, do you think that contributes to, I guess, the cyclical nature of security kind of always having to come back in and fix things and have findings?
Yeah, I think people is probably one of the biggest components, because I've seen companies where they had all the tools, all the different EDRs and different solutions. In a lot of cases, they're not adequately deployed or configured, or just sitting there, never being deployed at all. And when it comes into the picture, it's people, because there's a lot of cases where, for instance, it's getting to where pen test to get a foothold is getting more difficult because the EDRs are getting so good at blocking initial access that people are having to depend on social engineering through phishing, smishing, or vishing. But then also a lot of the vulnerabilities you see are just configuration, just basic hygiene, that people aren't configuring things correctly. So a lot of it's the people part, and I think sometimes it's the education, that there's not enough education around it.
Yeah.
And going back to offensive security, I think the defenders and IT folks need to be educated on offensive security, maybe not necessarily have them take pen testing courses, but just kind of educate them on the different assessment types, and then some of the different gaps that could be, can happen during pen tests. So I think the better educated consumer you have, the better off you are, and the more they can understand the need for the pen test.
Yeah, I think to me that sounds like a security culture, not really necessarily that like the people are the problem, because you always hear like, oh, people are your weakest link, and that kind of always irked me a little bit, that phrase. I think you're right. It's the training and the culture of the company to say, yeah, we have an issue and we're going to fix it, versus burying your head in the sand, or not giving folks, like arming them with the tools they need to be successful. So.
Yeah, kind of to comment on your comment about culture, is I used to work for this large mortgage company, And the company grew through acquisitions, and the business was really bad about, okay, if this IT team or this mortgage office wants to keep using this email app instead of coming into the overall app that the corporation's using, letting them get away with what technologies they want to keep, and letting them push back. They just kind of train them to realize that they can push back and get what they want. They were making money, so they could, pretty much get, whatever they wanted or reject what they didn't want.
Yeah, I've seen that over and over again too, where it's the merging of tech stacks, or you have one company that's essentially three separate companies operating inside of the same name brand because they want to maintain their own tech stacks. They want to keep doing things the way they've always done. And you're just exponentially increasing your cybersecurity footprint and, your attack surface. You've been doing this for a really long time. Was there a pivotal engagement or project that you worked on that you said, this is exactly what I want to do for the rest of my life?
Yeah, I don't know if there's any specific, but actually probably one of the most interesting pen tests I had. I was able to get command line access through a SQL injection vulnerability from the internet. And that was a lot of fun, be able to get access internally from a web app pen test. They had a SQL injection vulnerability, and they had XP command shell enabled, so you could enabling administrators and attackers alike to get command line access and administer the systems from the command line. So that was a lot of fun. But one of my first frustrations with risk acceptance, because this was a consulting gig that I was working, and the company came back and said, "Oh, this is a development system. It's not production, so we're going to file a risk acceptance." But the thing about it was, I was able to dump the password hash, crack the password hash. And I was able to do this like in 30 seconds. This was before, Hashcat was out, but hadn't been widely adopted. I didn't know how to use Hashcat yet, and I was just using John the Ripper. And in 30 seconds, I was able to crack the password hash, and it was password all lowercase and the number 1.
Oh,
And
gee.
so us as seasoned security professionals know that was probably not the only place that password was being used like that. And there's probably other weak passwords in that environment. And that's another thing about education and helping, our customers or people we work with to understand the risks of this. While this might have been a development system, it wasn't segregated in a development only enclave. So you
Of
were able
course.
to get access to other systems. It was a web app pen test, so lateral movement was out of scope. So I couldn't try to attack any other systems, but they filed a risk acceptance. And that was, but then on the other hand, to see people do things right, another consulting experience I was doing pen tests for a company. They had paid for a 90-day retest. So we went in there, we found highs, criticals, mediums, and lows. And by the time I came back, they'd remediated all the criticals, highs, and mediums. But during that time, there was a exploit created for one of those low criticality vulnerabilities. And so if they hadn't had me come back and retest in 90 days, it would have been open for another year. So seeing companies doing things the right way, like retests, and that's one of the common gaps in pen testing, is not doing it frequently enough. And the gaps can be addressed by retest on pen testing, more frequent pen testing, augmenting with, vulnerability management, doing vulnerability scans in between, because this was a simple CVE that could have been detected from a Nessus or Qualys scan. But fortunately they paid for a retest, and we were able to come back and detect it, and it was able to get remediated before, it was exploitable and open there for a year until the next pen test.
Yeah, and we just seen that, this month with the React vulnerability, where critical vulnerability, they released a patch, and then the patch created a critical vulnerability. So unless you're really into that cycle, you tend to not see those second and third order effects.
And thinking of that same topic there, a lot of threat actors and security researchers alike are going out after Patch Tuesday to see if they can reverse engineer the patch, if there's any kind of bypasses or any kind of vulnerabilities that are, kind of put in place from the patch.
Yeah. And kind of piggybacking off of the communication bit. So you have certainly built a reputation not only for, doing the work, getting your hands dirty, but also for teaching and being a really a really good communicator, like horizontally in organizations, but also vertically as well. Do you have any like tips and tricks on how you do that when you have leveled up from finding issues to explaining and communicating risk in a meaningful way that people will act on?
Yes, one of the things that I recommend is not using technical jargon, use
Mhm.
plain language to communicate so they understand. And this is a skill that I picked up a lot from teaching at Dallas College because some of my students came into my pen test class and I really didn't want anyone to fail. So I had cases where someone came into my class the very first course at Dallas College in his pen testing, which is not the ideal first course. And I recommended some different Linux trainings and Windows trainings to take along in parallel with the class so that they could get up to speed and get better value out of the class. So from that teaching experience, that's where I really learned, and I just really it's not all that difficult for people, especially now with uh, all the generative AI that you can go in and tell it, explain this to me
Yeah.
at an eighth grade level or whatever non-technical level, explain this to how management would understand. I think it's also important being able to communicate with the business units and CISOs and the board, learning how to speak in risk because they understand remote code execution is like a foreign language. But if you tell them if this is exploited, we could lose millions of dollars. Uh, Private information, customer data could be released, and it put a risk of the company's uh, reputation as well as revenue. And you speak in a language they understand, then they understand the need for it. Because when they hear this, they don't understand how critical this is or what's possible. So we need to be able to explain that in terms where they can understand.
Yeah, absolutely. Dollars and cents speaks across every business function in an organization. I think compliance and customer needs does as well. So that's great. Thank you.
So I know for me, I can look back on my career and give you a dozen different things that kind of forced me to grow, both technically and professionally. Um, is there anything that you can look back and go, this was my defining challenge that, made me grow, and how I lead, how you are professionally, or major technical skills kind of go to that next level?
From a technical standpoint, the OSCP certification, it took me more than one attempt to pass it. It was a very difficult certification, and for anyone that's done the OSCP certification, has worked as a pen tester, this doesn't always replicate real world because in some cases, some people kind of downplay the OSCP, say it's CTF like, but when you say it's CTF like, it doesn't make it easier. It's a lot of cases real world. You see this certain vulnerability, it's typically going to be exploitable. There's a higher probability, but a lot of cases with these systems they have in the exam, they'll kind of throw you in a different direction. So you're going down the wrong trail. So you're learning to execute all options to gain a foothold. That was a really good experience because it helped my hacking skills as a pen tester. Because when I got into pen testing, I had vulnerability scanning experience. I didn't have the hacking skills I need, and that helped with that. But soft skills, teaching, and really launching my career, the thing that's really a pivotal moment was teaching because in 2018 I started teaching. I've always been competitive and kind of a goal oriented person, and I finally come to that point. There comes a time that you're doing this long enough that you can't stay up to 3 or 5 o'clock in the morning taking these different courses or learning and then turn around going to work. And I kind of turned my focus to teaching, and that was really rewarding for me and really launched my career. I spoke before at conferences before I got into uh, teaching. But once I started teaching, it gave me a whole new subject to speak on because there weren't a lot of people out there sharing information on how to get started in pen testing. There was a lot of great content on pen testing, different types of attacks, but no one was sharing, what you needed to know before you started learning pen testing. So that really helped me launch uh, my speaking career, and just kind of my core mission kind of changed after that to educate. And that was mainly educating folks that wanted to become pen testers, but now I've used that same knowledge and realized that I can educate the blue teamers, IT types about offensive security and give them enough to understand things where they can be an educated consumer. It's good to know both sides, but if you understand more about how the attackers think, some of the attacks, you're going to be a better defender. And so that's kind of one of the things I've kind of pivoted more into is using the same knowledge to share it in communicate in a way that folks work in these other areas can understand.
Yeah. And coming from the other area, I appreciate that a lot.
We take for granted too many times that because we know this, it's secondhand for us. We know second nature. We know this like the back of our hand, but we take for granted that other folks don't know that. And that's
Mhm.
just like general security knowledge. Like all security professionals should understand that multi-factor authentication should be used, password managers, basic hygiene, we understand across the board, but the average person doesn't. But when we get more into our niches, there's less understanding from the other sides unless they've done both.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. There's just far too much in the realm of cybersecurity today for everyone to be an expert in everything. So I always have relied on my peers and my direct reports to help build a strong security program from the ground up. But speaking of like what you know now and all the experiences that you've had, if you could go back to yourself in the Wayback Machine to when you began your career, is there anything that you would focus on differently? Maybe your first 90 days, learn something different, or do you think your path is laid out for a particular reason?
Kind of think things played out the way they should have. And part of the reason I say that is if I would have known about pen testing when I first started in cybersecurity, which there were very few pen testing roles back then, I would have pursued that first. So I'm glad that things worked out the way they did because
Mhm.
I spent over 6 years in IT. So that system administrator experience helped me as a pen tester working on the blue
Mhm.
team side, helped me as a pen tester working in application security. So the path I would end up going down really worked out well. But one of the things I would have told my younger self is to be more patient and learn things more deeply because a lot of cases you learn enough to do it. And that's why if I would have had the opportunity to jump into pen testing, I would have, and it would have been a mistake because I would have missed so much education if I would have jumped directly into pen testing.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, totally agree with that. So cybersecurity is all about risk. Um, we look at things and through the lens of risk, but what's something that a decision you made in career that you can look back and go, that looked risky at the time, but ended up being like absolutely crucial to your development as a professional?
Yeah, I'd say not really so much. It was pretty much going more towards the vendor side and working
Mm.
with startups and working at consulting companies because one of the things I kind of learned from, you know, speaking at conferences and stuff when I used to work for a large national or global bank, some of my friends from the local community and myself were interviewed for an article for Vox magazine, online media source, about why it had hacking. It had nothing to do with my job, but someone from legal reached out and said, next time you do this, it needs to go through legal. And I quit saying that I work for this bank. I would list the Pwn School Project, my meetup group that I started, is being my employer to get around that. And the thing is, you work at these companies because you might speak at Black Hat Middle East and Africa doesn't mean that much. Your management might like that, but overall the company, it doesn't matter. But when I work for startups or vendors or consulting companies, it's a big deal because it helps their brand. So being able to leverage that to help other brands and so forth, that's kind of one of the big pivots and things that really helped my career going in that direction.
Yeah, I can totally see where, there are some companies that might not want to be associated with someone who's out here telling people how to hack into systems.
Yeah.
So we kind of talked about how you got to where you are. Now let's kind of shift gears and go into how do you lead and why do you lead? Because cybersecurity, isn't just leadership. It's, it isn't a title. It's truly a pressure cooker. You're juggling people, tools, adversaries, expectations, business realities all at once. So let's kind of dig into how you want to do this and how you lead and define your leadership strategy. So,
Yeah. So for me, it's really leaning heavy into mentoring for the more junior folks to help bring them up to speed. Because one of the things I really love how things have evolved. Because when I was started out in IT in '97, you always had that certain handful of Unix administrators or someone who worked in IT that weren't going to share how they did something because it was their job security or, they were just trying to avoid other people advancing their careers because they felt like it would affect them. And I'm really glad to see that that's gotten better. You don't see as much gatekeeping. So I really believe in trying to mentor and help those uh, come up to speed, and those that are a little more senior, encourage them to mentor others and make sure
Mhm.
they share their knowledge with others. Because one of the biggest things that's a mistake of the job security thing where you're not sharing is what happens when you need to take time off. You want to take PTO, you want to take some vacation time, and something breaks, you're going to get called in or called. So if you train the other people around you that you are replaceable, then you make your life easier when you're not at work, and you'll put in a lot less hours.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I can get on board with the mentorship. I wouldn't be where I am if I didn't have great mentors guiding me, and they still do guide me today. I mean, I don't, like I said before, I don't know everything, and I haven't gone through every experience yet. So I think that building a strong mentorship program, either at your own organization or following one yourself, I think is really important. So I do appreciate that you mentioning that. And for folks that are listening, if you don't have a mentor, or if you want to be a mentor, reach out, find someone, have those conversations. I think it's a really beautiful thing. It helps people get a long way.
Yeah,
Um,
being a mentor helps tremendously. It's one of the best things I've done, mentoring and teaching.
yeah.
I have learned far more as a educator and a mentor than I ever did as a student.
And I think there's just a lot to be said about, for anyone, the older folks out there, it helps a lot to learn these younger generations, because you can easily play it off and, you know, demean and call people snowflakes and so forth. I think the better you understand them, you understand the way they are. And that's one of the best things I've done in my career, is getting to understand the younger generation, and just, yeah, a lot of cases I'd rather spend time with them than people my age.
Fair enough. Yeah. So aside from mentorship, um, what leadership behaviors do you deliberately practice on engagements or projects with your clients? Are there any like non-negotiables, like say perhaps being calm under pressure, providing clarity, quality standards? Is there any like leadership qualities that you possess that you always demonstrate?
One of the things I do, and this is regardless of what level you are, is if you're doing a pen test, you come into an organization, I think you need to kind of level set and let them know, okay, we're a team. I'm here to assess the security. I'm not trying to make you look bad. I'm trying to help you improve upon what you've done, and kind of set that stage, because then when it comes time for the report readout, they understand you're trying to help. They're more receptive to the findings. And then also during that too, when you're writing the pen test report, I always like to put in things that they're doing well, because you don't want to make it's a report card. It's not, everything you're doing bad. You want to include the things they're doing well too. So if I go into an organization that it's internal pen test and I have to go on site, I'm taking note of, their physical security controls, because this may be an opportunity for them to prove upon what they're doing. And it's also a way to add some commentary. I went into organizations that had really good physical security controls. Even though it wasn't part of the assessment, I would document that in a report to let them know what they're doing. And it's an easier report for them to hand their CISO or management. They show they're doing good things too, not that everything is messed up.
Yeah, I've always appreciated reports that are holistic. They're telling me the good, the bad, and the ugly, not just the things that I'm doing wrong. We've talked a lot about mentoring. So when we look at junior talent, are there things that you specifically look for? Is it like curiosity, discipline, fundamentals, communication, something else? Is what's the special sauce that gets your attention to develop young talent?
Yeah, curiosity, learning on their own, because not to say, universities and colleges are good, but you take someone that's, spending a lot of hours on hack the box, doing CTFs, doing a lot of self-learning. These types are self-starters. They're not going to, maybe need as much direction as someone else, but they're just someone that has that desire and passion to do the job, because, cybersecurity is not always fun and not always an easy job. And just that curiosity, and someone that enjoys a challenge.
Yep. Yep. I agree. I find that this, and speaking of, the younger generation, the ones that I've dealt with, I've had to be like, you have a job description, go and do that. Go. They're not the ones that I have personally, not speaking holistically. Um, I've had to say, you have a job description, you know what to do. I've given you your tasks. You have a project board, go and do it. Where some of the other folks that that have not been on my team, but I've worked with as stakeholders, have been those self-starters, who have gone and done that. And it's a very different type of relationship that I end up having with them. One built on I think on trust as a foundation, because I trust them to not wait to be handheld, and that just helped those folks that I no longer work in that organization, but they have moved up while the others have not. I think to your point, like being a self-starter is really important and demonstrates that growth mindset and willingness to make mistakes. I think is really important with that too. I think that shows a
And I
lot.
think, and from a leadership perspective, you need to have a culture that it's acceptable to make mistakes, because if
Yes.
people are worried about your wrath, they're not going to tell you what the mistake they
Yeah.
made. You want them to
Yeah.
come to you
Very true.
proactively and share, hey, I messed this up. And, that way you can kind of work to, you have transparency in your organization, and they're feel more comfortable in their organization.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I agree.
most definitely. There's a quote from Colin Powell: "When people stop coming to you with your problems, you are the problem."
Yeah.
Ooh,
I like
I
that.
like that. Yeah, I like that too. You're so good at that stuff, Josh. You can just whip those quotes out all the time. That's great. Switching gears a little bit, how do you balance the hands-on credibility that you absolutely have with your leadership responsibility? What is that like? Where's that line between staying technical enough to lead well, but stepping back and letting someone else take the reins on the execution?
Yes, I think to stay, because like the percentage of the way my role's made up where I'm at is I'm 50% thought leadership, evangelism, 30% pen testing, and 20% content strategy. So one of the things I've also learned too is not, maybe staying cutting edge. I try to stay up to date, but then also realize too that the audiences that I'm speaking to don't need that in-depth explanation of what I'm presenting. And so I've just kind of learned to balance that. It was kind of hard to break from that, but I found that a lot of times when we cling to the technical too much, then we miss out on opportunities. And if you're going to, you know, move up the ranks and improve, kind of evolve in your career, you've got to be willing to be less technical and take on some of those other roles.
Yeah, I know. For me, I particularly early in my leadership career, I had a problem letting go of the keyboard, so to speak. I still wanted to be in there. I still wanted to be doing kind of those day-to-day tasks. And I had a mentor of mine tell me, come pull me aside and tell me, you've got to let your team do their job and not do it for them. You're there to empower them, not to, do the job for them. Otherwise you don't need them.
That's so
So,
true. And this sometimes too, it's easier sometimes to do it than tell someone how to do it. So trying to break that habit.
so kind of with that in mind, how do you distinguish a good technical manager from a strong cybersecurity leader? And what do you think the difference between those two things are?
Yeah, I think that understanding technology at a high level is good, but just being able to manage people well and playing into that mentoring, be able to mentor their direct reports. Once you get the leadership level, you're not mentoring everyone down the chain, but just mentoring your direct reports and helping them to be better leaders, trying to train them to be your replacements.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's really important that like you're training them to be your replacement. Like that succession planning. A lot of people are afraid of that, as we mentioned previously, of like, oh, I'm going to lose my job. Well, no, you want to have people prepared to step into the role because you never know what can happen or what opportunities they might get somewhere else that would allow them to grow. I think that's that's really important as well. Um, we've talked about what good leadership looks like from your perspective, but what does great leadership look like from the client side during like a pen test or a red team exercise? What do the best security and I would say engineering leaders as well do that makes the work a higher quality or more valuable to an organization?
Clear communication and constantly communicating the status of a pen test report. The client shouldn't have to come back to you and ask, where are we at on this pen test? If there anything that comes along that's delaying it, then you should let them know before they come back to ask you.
Yeah. Yeah. I've had that several
So you've interviewed and worked with some of the top minds in cybersecurity leadership across the globe. What patterns have you seen that separate the best leaders from everyone else?
Yeah, I guess some of the best leaders I've seen are the ones of the mindset that are servant leaders, that they're really setting an example for their staff, not only direct reports, and being a good example for them as a leader. So that's some of the things that I see most of all. I mean, it's interesting to see the different management types, especially like across startups. You see some CEOs of startups that are more mainly good business and strategy, but then you see some that are more technical, and you see some that are kind of a balance. So it's kind of hard sometimes for founders and CEO startups because they're trying to do everything. And one of the things that I see in a good leader is they're able to hand off and let others, delegate and let others help them do uh, things to help something that they're better at. You can focus your time more on business. One of the most impressive founders to me is Casey Ellis from BugCrowd. So Casey Ellis is the founder of BugCrowd, but I think he's like CTO now. He was CEO at the start, but he had the thought and mindset to realize, I need someone in here that's a good CEO, and I can do what I do best. And so I think sometimes having checking your ego to bring in someone else to do something and not seeing that as a weakness.
Yeah, ego has been the downfall of a lot of good cybersecurity practitioners as they try to move up into leadership roles. Um, so we've talked a little bit about leadership. Let's kind of roll up our sleeves and get a little more technical. So when you walk into an environment today, what's your mental model for prioritizing risk? How quickly do you separate this is interesting from this is material, or this is theoretical from this is exploitable, and the whole attack operations where that medium vulnerability can be chained into a critical outcome?
Yes, definitely. You want to look at things that are exploitable, because according to CISA Kev, a lot of the major exploited vulnerabilities out there are lower level vulnerabilities that are chained together. So keeping that in mind, also the business impact. So if it's some system that really doesn't have critical data on it, or maybe the data is not any kind of intellectual property, health records, or customer data, then you kind of base the criticality on the data that system holds, and not necessarily, giving it the same risk rating as you would something with, health data or so forth.
Yeah. And so that leads me to a question that I have then. Um, would you mind walking us at a high level kind of through your engagement flow? Like what that looks like, and then how do you integrate with GRC functions? Because you just said a lot of very buzzy GRC words. You said about like risk and high, critical, PII. Could you kind of talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So, the basic workflow of a pen test is, you do the scoping call that and ideally, I'd say if you want to go a step further, I would say it would be a good idea to have someone on from GRC during a pen test when you're defining the scope, so that way you can make sure you're covering any kind of compliance. Although I don't believe pen test should be done for a checkbox, but bring in the GRC folks so they're working with you, and working with them during the pen test. You find findings, find the way they
Mhm.
want that presented to them, because if you can write things up better in the pen test report, it can help them get compliance. And sometimes, like I mentioned earlier, that being able to speak in terms like risk that the board can understand, if you're able to do that in the pen test report, the easier it's going to be for the stakeholders to get that remediation done. And sometimes remediation is more than
Hmm.
just applying a patch or just doing simple configuration. Sometimes it may require bringing in a whole new system. It may require additional staff. So the more you have to back that up, the better. And I think working as a partner with the GRC team is very helpful. One of the best experiences I had, kind of similar to that, is the IT audit team. I was working for this large global product company and I was doing an Active Directory pen test, and the IT audit team was also working on an audit for the Windows uh, server and workstation environment. And I was working with them, and so I got to see the way they worked, and I was able to help them understand things better, because not always GRC or your audit folks are really deep technical, but we're
Yep.
able to help each other, and it was a good partnership. I went away with a different mindset about looking at pen tests as just vulnerabilities. I went away looking at security controls and risks.
That's fascinating. I like that.
So that kind of leads directly into kind of my next thought is, you know, how do you define when a pen test engagement is done? Is it a coverage thing? Is it a depth? Is it proving exploitability? Is it some business narrative, or we just ran out of time? What do you consider the point for when a pen test is done?
It's going to depend on the scope, and there's going to be, a certain number of hours in there. So it could be a combination of those. But one of the things I think that makes for a better outcome is, over the years, endpoint detection systems have been so difficult to actually go and be able to gain a foothold. And one of the type of assessments I really like, that's one of my favorites, is an assume breach pen test. Because
Mm.
before, in the past, thinking about when you're done, a pen tester would go into organization, he can't get a foothold, or they can't get a foothold, and they write everything up in a report. And maybe they weren't able to use all those hours, and then they call it good. With something like an assume breach, you can start out the typical method where you don't have credentials, trying to gain a foothold. And once you come to a point where you can't get any further, then you go to the assume breach type of pen test. Because what this also does is this kind of tests, your resilience against ransomware. Because if someone sent malware or ransomware and you click on it, whatever system and person that's on that system logged in, that malware ransomware has their level of access. So you're able to test that. Because one of the things, kind of to pivot just a little bit and go off topic a little bit, but still pertinent to this subject, is a lot of companies have gone to where they're just doing phishing campaigns, where they have this canned phishing campaign that someone in IT, maybe a junior person in security, is sending out these emails, and they're really just basically for security awareness. We really need to get beyond that. We need to be, whenever you're doing any kind of testing for phishing, you need some kind of payload in it. What happens if someone clicks on this? What's possible? Because a lot of these footholds by threat actors are because they're sending some kind of malware or ransomware in that environment.
Mm.
I know for me as a practitioner, when I get pen test contracted out, I always do a two-phase pen test. One where it's try to break into my system, and then phase two is it's assume breach. I'm going to give you credentials, and I want you to find everything you possibly can, because ultimately you're just going to make my job easier to go to the board and say, here are the things that somebody else found. I have my own internal pen test team, but no two pen testers pen test exactly the same. So you're going to find something different than what I'm going to find, and then you're going to find something different than what Kayla would find. We're all going to find potentially the same thing, and then potentially three separate things that neither one of us would have found otherwise. So I truly agree with you that the assumed breach is a critical part.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And staying on that same path, actually, where do most teams underperform, and what does excellent look like when it comes to like a pen testing team? Is there any sort of like, if you wave a magic wand and have the perfect pen test team, like what would that look like, if in your opinion?
Yeah, the perfect pen test team, I think it's kind of a combination of backgrounds and mindsets. Someone with a development background is going to be good for creating tooling. They may be better for doing application pen testing. And then, having just folks with backgrounds in infrastructure, cloud, and understand those other technologies, because before you can properly assess an environment, you need to understand how the technology works and how to secure the technology before you can learn how to break into it. So having a broad spectrum of backgrounds, because you take a lot of people that have been in it longer, you're going to have a lot more of your traditional infrastructure, pen testing, client server, and network. And sometimes they're missing the cloud piece. So now, since most companies are at least hybrid, if not cloud based, you need someone that's got experience both those areas. And one of the things I've seen pen test teams really excels when you have someone on the team that can create exploits or create different types of automations to scale what they're doing.
Mhm.
So, kind of looking at over the last year, what technical issues do you still see and you can't believe that they're still occurring, and why do you think they still persist?
The reason they persist is going back to that human element, but I think a lot of the people overcomplicate things in just taking care of the basic security hygiene, complex passwords, using MFA, using password managers. I think that's just the basic stuff. People get too complicated, and you got to take care of the basic stuff before you get into the more complex
Yeah,
configurations and tools.
yeah, I totally agree. One of the things I do when I speak at conferences, I usually try to throw this question in at some point of, how many of you are 100% confident in your CMDB has every asset in your organization? And it doesn't matter what size the audience, anywhere from, 15 to a couple thousand. I have had 0 people raise their hand and say that their CMDB is 100% accurate. And to your point, those fundamentals are so critical, but we just don't do them real well.
Yeah, sometimes I think we get too enamored with the bright, shiny new and not concentrate on the things we need to do. We just need to make sure we're doing the basic hygiene stuff. But it's interesting. You see a lot of these big breaches that weren't elaborate hacks. It was an open S3 bucket. In a lot of cases, internal pen test, someone's got to share. I mean, myself and some of my colleagues have done pen tests before where you saw on a network share that people, someone in management has a spreadsheet with their banking and personal banking information in it. They just assume that it's secure, and people just aren't, being careful, and back to that human element.
Yeah, absolutely. And pulling at that thread a little bit on going back to the basics. Do you have any examples of, say, an engagement that you did where you found you found assets that the companies didn't know that they had that were completely exposed, and you were able to kind of swoop in like a superhero and save the day? Or it was too little, too late, maybe, and something had happened and they weren't even aware about it?
Yeah, I've seen cases where I used to work for an external attack surface management company. They had a SaaS solution, and there was cases where HMIs, the HMI controllers for ICS systems were exposed to the internet, where anyone could go and start and stop functions within that machinery, and it wasn't protected, on the internet. It was just open to the internet. You could go through. We were able to detect it with our software, but someone could have used Shodan, which a lot of people do, going through looking for security cameras or different ICS type devices and HMI controllers, and just gain access to it.
Yeah, go on Shodan and just search for, known Siemens controllers, and seeing the things that pop up is just wild. So in modern environments, particularly you highlighted that there are a lot of organizations that are hybrid or fully cloud. Is identity now the new primary control plane? Um, you know, what is the most repeatable pathways for attacks? Are you seeing credential hygiene, MFA gaps, misconfigurations, privilege sprawl? Yes to all of those.
Kind of a little bit of all of it, but one of the things too is just from password leaks. One of the biggest things, because I mentioned earlier, it's getting harder to get a foothold in environments. So one of the go-to things for pen testers and threat actors alike is to go look at these credential dumps, because a lot of people are using passwords across the environments, and they'll go through, get this information and do a password spray to gain initial access.
So when you think about when you walk into a company, are there any signals that tell you that an organization could actually detect and respond in a meaningful way to any of this information that we've just been discussing?
Yeah, I think part of it is kind of a telltale sign is if you go in somewhere and they're doing really well with their physical security, they have really
Hmm.
good physical security controls in place. So if they're taking things seriously from that level, a lot of cases that culture kind of resonates throughout the environment.
Oh, that's really interesting. Okay. I honestly didn't even really consider that. I mean, obviously, I know security and physical security are together. I don't need anybody to at me. Like I
Yeah.
know the overlap. Please don't. um, but coming at it from that perspective, that if they are mature in their physical security awareness and their controls there, that it could potentially bleed through to a tighter security posture as well. That's a really interesting take.
And I think a lot of that's strong partnerships between physical security. Then some cases, some
Mhm.
organizations have a CSO instead of a chief information security officer that is responsible for physical and digital security.
Yeah,
So
that's.
you're so you're
Yeah.
saying that if I can't get through with a box of donuts, that it's probably more likely I'm not going to be able to do a cyber attack against them.
Yeah, there's a good chance. But also at the same time, too, is just the fact that one of the things I tell people is you can have the most complex endpoint detection systems, but if you have a terminal open to a system as administrator, someone can walk up. They don't have to be an elite hacker to be able to break in. Physical controls make a big difference.
Yep. Yeah,
So
it's great.
you've spent, the last few years, we can't have a conversation without mentioning AI at least once. So where do you genuinely see AI helping security in the next, 2 to 5 years? And where do you think it introduces new risk and, more importantly, false confidence?
Yeah, I think it helps a lot to scale with what people are doing because there's some automated pen testing products out there. So when I used to work for a large bank, for our PCI pen testing, there were 13 people on our team. We only got through half of our PCI pen testing each year. If we'd had some of these AI automation tools for pen testing, we could have tested those environments multiple times. I don't think they're a replacement yet. I think it's kind of an advancement above a vulnerability scanner.
Mm.
It because they can actually exploit targets. So it's a way to scale people. I see a way to scale teams as well as even on the defender side, I ran across a company the first part of last year that had like a co-pilot for blue teamers that were able to help them out for doing defenses type stuff. So I think be able to scale what people do and even take people that are more junior and help them get up to speed, even quicker. But as far as, in bringing in risks is a lot of cases, some cases people are putting sensitive data into a public LLM and it's getting leaked. And I think one of the things there you just really need to do is people are going to use AI. So make sure there's proper training on how to use AI as well as security for AI, give them secure environments to be able to work in. One of the biggest risks I kind of see, one of the scariest things is that, you know, this is possibility, maybe not for sure, but one of the things that kind of scares me is with vibe coding, you take people that understand software development that maybe don't understand security, introduce some risks. But if you take someone that doesn't even understand software development trying to build tools and they don't even realize that these systems or applications need to be assessed, have pen tests done against them, it kind of really worries me that there's going to be a lot of risk introduced. I think bug bounty hunters are probably going to have a field day. These companies have the insights to actually have bug bounties done against their applications.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah, that definitely resonates in that, I definitely see AI being a thing that can augment, our humans, never replace them because there's just going to be some things that humans are always better at. But to your point, folks are using it, whether we want to agree with it or not. Every organization has some shadow AI. So how do you get folks to use the right things is kind of the crux of the issue that we have, I think, coming in the next few years.
Yeah,
I,
because I'm at these conferences sometimes and I see all these booths with AI products. And, a lot of some of these startups and vendors don't come from a security space that are creating security tools, but it really is kind of scary to think how quickly you can, create a minimal viable product that looks functional, that you put it out there and it's, not secure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but I appreciate that you said security for AI and not AI security. I think that's a big differentiator. So we are, coming up to our closeout here. So we always end Criticality Live with the set of like core questions. We probably won't get through all of them, but just to give our audience those practical, take it with you insights that they can use straight away. So the first question that I'd like to ask you in that regard is, if you could fix one thing about cybersecurity overnight, what would it be?
If I could fix one thing about cybersecurity overnight, it would be the whole job and hiring situation. Because there's companies reporting jobs that are not out there to help their stocks and stuff. There are folks out there that are talented that if they were given a chance, they could come in and do the work. Those are kind of the things I would like to see, because we're supposed to have all these jobs, but then people are having a hard time finding jobs.
Yeah. I did a talk at Blue Team Con about complementary skill sets and being able to fill those roles. I could not agree with you more on that
Yeah, you
one.
could take someone that's a network or system administrator and put them in a lot of roles and they would do just fine.
Mm. Yep.
So, if you could take one practice, technical or cultural, it doesn't matter, that you wish organizations would stop immediately, what would be that thing?
What I'd like to see is more companies being open to people at all levels and not treat someone a certain way because you're up here and there may be an intern or someone hasn't been with the company long. One of my favorite all-time CISOs, and I'm going to say his name is Jason Whitty. When I was at US Bank, whenever he would come into town, he would meet for lunch with us. And I was several levels. I was at least 2, 3 levels below him, and he had enough respect for us and cared enough about his team to meet with the whole team. And I really think there needs to be more of that, because that's going to build loyalty if the employees feel like the team, if the company cares. So that's more of the thing I'd like to see, less of the, you know, segmentation or segregation between management and the typical worker.
Awesome.
I like that. I think that really does help to set the bar for the corporate culture. I like that. Um, so you are active all over the industry. For listeners who want to follow your work or reach out, what's the best way to connect with you?
My best social media platform is LinkedIn, and it's just my name, Phillip Wylie. And also, I have a podcast, The Phillip Wylie Show, which you can find on my YouTube channel and all the major podcast platforms. I'm also on X and Instagram as well, and also TikTok.
A security professional on TikTok.
Yes.
Like,
I'm
Oh,
I'm
my
more
days.
concerned with Chinese hardware than I am TikTok,
All
because I'm
right, you
not
guys heard
putting
it
anything on
here.
there. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
so before we let you go, do you have any final thoughts you want to leave with our audience on cybersecurity leadership or building cybersecurity resilience in 2026 and beyond?
Just one thing I want to end with, that it's not just specifically security, is just be kind to each other. There's a lot of division in the world these days, and just be nice to each other, because sometimes you may someone could be having a really bad day, and if you reach out to them or you talk to them, treat them nicely, it can make a big difference. Attitude is uh, it's infectious. So if you are having a bad attitude, you yell at someone, then you put them in a bad mood. If you ever notice you've gone to a store or somewhere out in public, a restaurant, and you hold the door for someone to come in, a lot of cases you see them doing the same thing. So we just need to kind of be kind to each other.
That is absolutely brilliant. Be
Yep.
kinder than you have to, because you never know what someone else is going through.
Yes.
Yes, I love that. That's great. Well, all right. That's a wrap on this episode of Criticality Live, everyone. Huge thanks to our guest, Phillip Wylie, and an even bigger thanks to all of you for hanging out with us and being part of the growing community of leaders who are just done with the buzzwords and ready for some real conversations. If you got value out of today's episode, hit the follow button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and drop us a review here on LinkedIn, Spotify, brand new Spotify, or on demand on our YouTube channel. It helps us more than you know. And of course, a big shout out to our sponsor, Secure Nation, for powering this conversation. They're helping organizations defend smarter, respond faster, and make cybersecurity something that actually works. So go check them out. This has been Criticality Live, where we cut through the noise and get to what really matters. See you next time. Take care, everyone.